Hello and welcome to week 3, Play and Pedagogy. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I respect their cultural beliefs and their spiritual relationship with their country and recognise that these are still important to Whadjuk people today. This beautiful artwork here is from Natalie Booth, who in 2019 won the National Indigenous Creative Art Competition with this piece when she was in Year 8. Last week we looked at the neuroscientific perspectives on play. We looked at play and thinking, Bloom's taxonomy, what else happens in play. We revisited developmental domains and holism, the applying perspectives on play to planning, and assessment 1 questions. This week, we're looking at the policies and perspectives on play in Australia, the curricula and policy framework for early childhood education. So this one is a little bit more drier than other ones, but it does inform all our teaching and learning and guidelines for early childhood. In our tute, we're going to look at the decision-making process for the kindergarten curriculum guidelines, discussing the required considerations, reviewing and discussing principles and practices and outcomes in EYLF in detail, and applying a policy analysis to our play episode. We'll also be making Play-Doh just to have something a bit lighter as well. So this week we explore play in policies and frameworks such as the NQS, the EYLF, and of course the West Australian curriculum. You can see here an older but still very relevant quote. Planning and teaching for learning through play has long been considered a key feature of early childhood education, a feature which distinguishes it from other sectors of education and is deeply grounded in our history. You'll see that when you go out on prac in pre-kindy, kindy, pre-primary, that you will see those features of play, maybe not so much in year 1 and 2, but it's good to be looking out for that. So exploring play in policy is essential. We look at it through the kindergarten guidelines, we look at it through early years framework and the West Australian curriculum. These documents are just one way that we can justify having play in our classrooms. Let's recap play. Play has been studied by scholars for over 200 years, and despite their differences in theory of play and some of the developments, there is definitely a shared consensus that play has a positive effect on children's overall development and learning. Play is seen as a right in the United Nations Rights of the Child that we in Australia are signatory of, that we should be upholding these rights. When we look at the play episodes, that we see that holistic development. It's optimal for brain development. It's crucial for developing the whole child. So when you're observing any play, you should be seeing that development. Children make sense of their world through play. Through play, they're constructing an identity, who they are, what they know, what their joys and fears are. And most importantly, play is concerned with process, not the product. So we're not looking at what children have to bring home to show their parents or families. It's about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're learning while they're doing it. And play is represented as the foundation for all curriculum. So what is the policy framework? We've got the Melbourne Declaration and the Alice Springs Declaration. We've got our NQS, National Quality Standard. We've got the Early Years Learning Framework. We've got our Kindergarten Curriculum Guidelines. We've got our West Australian Curriculum, Pre-Primary to Year 3, and General Capabilities. And we've got the United Nations Declaration of the Child. The government's department also has what they've developed from 2019, what they call the Department of Education Policy Priority Documents. Each time they release a different one. They've released a literacy and numeracy focus, and in 2019 their priority document called for play-based learning in the early years. The Melbourne Declaration. In 2008, State, Territory and Commonwealth Ministers of Education, meeting as the Ministerial Council of Education, Employment, Training and Youth Affairs, released the Melbourne Declaration of Education Goals for Young Australians, which set the direction for Australian schooling for the next 10 years. The Melbourne Declaration commits to supporting all young Australians to become successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active, informed citizens, and to promoting equity and excellence in education. There are very strong connections between the Early Years Learning Framework and the WA Australian curriculum. They share a policy context and a commitment to equitable learning outcomes for all Australians. Both the EYLF and the West Australian curriculum are driven by the vision enunciated in the Melbourne Declaration, so in page 4, about the kind of society that education should seek to promote: successful learners, confident and creative individuals, active and informed citizens. And then in December 2019, the Alice Springs Declaration was released. And it builds on these past declarations, but it has the two distinct but interconnected goals. Goal 1, the Australian education system promotes excellence and equality. Goal 2, all young Australians become confident and creative individuals, successful lifelong learners, active and informed members of the community. So you can see how that relates to the Melbourne Declaration. Achieving these educational goals is the responsibility of Australian governments and the education community in partnership with young Australians, their families and carers, and the broader community. So when we're looking at the National Quality Framework, this communicates a national view about the quality of early childhood education and care and school-aged children up to Year 2. The NQS is part of the National Quality Framework, which consists of the Education and Care Services, national law, Education Care Services, that's national regulation, National Quality Standard, rating and assessment process. That's what governs early learning centres. The Early Years Learning Framework informs the development of a program for each child that enhances their learning and development. The EYLF was written to support the implementation of the National Quality Standard. Prior to this, there was very limited guidelines for early learning centres. It really influences our understanding of young children and our pedagogy. The West Australian Kindergarten Guidelines is the WA Government's response to the national curriculum. It aims to keep children's learning and development at the centre of curriculum decision making. So then we have the WA curriculum content and achievement standards. As programs transition from the EYLF to the WA curriculum, there should be an ongoing focus on personal and social competence, literacy, numeracy, and creative and critical thinking. In other words, the domains transition into those integrated learning areas. So you can see that link. The foundation to Year 2 scope is clear that children construct and review their learning through interactions with others, experimentation, scaffolding, explicit teaching, practice and play. And that's from Akara 2009. So in terms of continuity of pedagogy, the West Australian curriculum recognises that early childhood approaches espoused by the EYLF continue to be appropriate in those early years of schooling. Let's look at the national quality standards in a bit more detail. The NQS applies to both early learning centres and schools up to and including Year 2, but overseen by differing governing bodies for the early learning centres and schools. The NQS comprises of 7 quality areas, 15 standards, and 40 elements that describe the outcomes that contribute to the standard being achieved. The quality areas are critical aspects of service provision. For example, educational program and practice, children's health and safety, physical environment, relationships and collaborative partnerships, alongside management areas such as staffing arrangements and leadership and service management. There's the 7 areas there. So how do the NQS standards and elements relate to play? In Quality Area 1, the first standard is all about the program. The second standard is about the practice. And the third standard of Quality Area 1 is about assessment and planning. So as you can see, it's child-centred. We want to take the child's current knowledge, strengths, ideas, cultures, abilities and interests that are the foundation of our program. So we always start with the child first. We are intentional with our teaching. So we're deliberate and purposeful in our decisions and actions for planning. We have responsive teaching and scaffolding. Educators respond to children's idea and play and extend their learning through open-ended questions, interactions and feedback. It's child-directed learning. Each child's agency is promoted, enabling them to make choices and decisions that influence and advance their world. Agency is so important in those early years that we're looking at how are they having a say and making choices and decisions in their learning as well. And importantly, looking at our assessment and planning cycle. So it's a development, an ongoing cycle of observation, analysing learning, documentation, planning, implementation and reflection, and starting again. Looking at play in relationship to Quality Area 3. So Quality Area 3 is about the design and use of the physical environment. The first standard is about the design, which includes being fit for purpose, and also about the upkeep. The second standard is about the use of the environment and includes resources, materials and equipment that allows for multiple uses, that there's sufficient number, that enable every child to engage in play-based learning, as well as an environmental responsibility. So it's our outdoor and indoor spaces that they're organised, adapted and support every child's participation, looking at both built and natural environments. In Quality Area 5, how that relates to play, it's about the relationship with children. The first standard is about relationships between educators and children. So it not only includes positive educator to child interactions, but also the dignity and the rights of every child are maintained, again, going back to the rights of the child. And the second standard is about relationships between the children themselves, which it looks at that each child is supported to regulate their own behaviour, respond appropriately to behaviour of others, and communicate effectively to resolve conflicts. So you can see how that happens in play. Collaborative learning in play. They help each other, they learn from each other, and crucially are educator to child interactions. We must be able to build trusting relationships so children feel secure, confident and included. And this again you'll see later on in the EYLF. So our early years learning framework. So this has been written to support the achievement of the NQS and the goals of the National Quality Framework. The EYLF is woven throughout the NQS and is particularly evident in the quality areas of 1, 3, 5, 6 and 7. Educators will need to understand and embrace the EYLF in order to achieve that national quality standard. Fundamental to the framework is a view of children's lives as characteristics of belonging, being, and becoming. So experiencing belonging, knowing where and with whom you belong. It's integral to human existence. Children belong to a family first, a cultural group, a neighbourhood, a wider community. That's Bronfenbrenner. So belonging acknowledges children's interdependence with others and the basis of relationships in defining identities. In early childhood and throughout life, relationships are crucial to that sense of belonging. Belonging is then central to being and becoming in that it shapes who children are and who they can become. When we look at being, childhood is a time to be, to seek and make meaning of the world. Being recognises the significance of the here and now in children's lives. It's about the present and them knowing themselves, building and maintaining relationships with others, engaging with life's joys and complexities, and meeting challenges in everyday life. The early childhood years are not solely preparation for the future, but it's also about being present in the here and the now. When we look at becoming, it's looking at children's identities, their knowledge, their understandings, their capacities, skills and relationships change during childhood. They are shaped by many different events and circumstances. Becoming reflects this process of rapid and significant change that occurs in the early years as young children learn and grow. It emphasises learning to participate fully and actively in society. Here's the framework. The framework puts children's learning at the centre, so you can see that there. It's at the core and comprises 3 interrelated elements: principles, practice, and learning outcomes. All 3 elements are fundamental to early childhood pedagogy and curriculum decision making. This diagram shows the relationship between learning outcomes, the principles and practice, which centres on the child's learning. The 3 elements, the 3 themes of belonging, being and becoming are contained, overlapping, and all of these elements. The EYLF is based on sound, proven early childhood pedagogy and practice principles. Play-based learning is based on the notion that children construct knowledge and have an innate drive to make sense of their world. Also fundamental to this approach is the belief that children construct knowledge by integrating new knowledge. That's constructivism. So through actively engaging in their environments and social construction as they convey meaning to others. Therefore, you need to provide a space to play with peers and to freely explore their environment. Children's desire to play and learn, they desire to play and learn through play. The presence of an educator who engages in play with children can make a huge difference to children's development. The EYLF stated image of the child. The United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, the convention stated that all children have the right to an education that lays a foundation for the rest of their lives, maximising their ability and respects their family, cultural and other identities and languages. The Convention also recognises children's right to play and be active participants in all matter affecting their lives. So you can see how that comes through. Children are capable and competent. They actively construct their own learning in social context. Their learning is dynamic, complex and holistic. Takes in all those domains: emotional, personal, social, physical, linguistic, spiritual, creative, that it's all interwoven and interrelated. So we look at that holism. Children have agency, rights, capabilities. Children can initiate and lead the learning. Children can be active participants and decision makers in matters that affect them. So the principles of early childhood pedagogy that underpin the practice. These are the 5 principles underpinning practice in the EYLF: secure, reciprocal and respectful relationship, partnerships, high expectation and equity, respect for diversity, ongoing learning and reflective practice. So educators draw on a rich repertoire of pedagogical practices to promote children's learning. There are 8 pedagogical practices outlined in the EYLF. You can see here holistic approaches, as we've talked about previously, that holism, that everything is interrelated. Learning through play is one of the 8 practices of the early years framework. The early years framework defines play as a context for learning through which children organise and make sense of their social worlds as they engage actively with people, objects and their representations. This is a great definition of play, and it's the aim of this document that's that shared language. So defines play as a context for learning through which children organise and make sense of their social worlds as they engage actively with people, objects and representation. Play allows children to express themselves, to act out scenarios without consequence, to mimic social situations. It is a really valued means of learning and should be absolutely be part of the early years environment. Intentional teaching needs to be deliberate, purposeful and thoughtful. It needs to be actively promoting children's learning through worthwhile and challenging experiences and interactions that foster high-level thinking skills, using strategies such as modelling and demonstrating, open questioning, speculating, explaining, engaging in shared thinking and problem solving to extend children's thinking and learning. Then we move into the West Australian Curriculum Guidelines. The West Australian Curriculum Guidelines is the WA Government's response to the national curriculum. It aims to keep children's learning and development at the centre of curriculum decision making. There's links there to a PDF on the curriculum kindergarten guidelines that incorporates the EYLF. Again, children's learning and development is at the centre. So, curriculum decision-making process that's required of you as early childhood teachers. If you see again, children's learning and development are at the centre. So we're looking at planning, enacting, assessing, evaluating and reflecting. This is the cyclical and ongoing teaching and learning decisions that professionals make. We plan and organise. We enact. And then we respond. We monitor and assess and document. We analyse and evaluate. We reflect on that learning, what's happening, and then we repeat this cycle. We plan for learning again, using multiple cycles for this process. As you can hear, it's all encapsulated with the context. Every context is going to be different. We can't just take one planning document and put it into another school or centre, because the needs of the child come first. So we look at our context, then we do our planning based on the child's learning and developmental needs. We need to look at differentiation and inclusion, what early learning environments we have for play, those relationships and partnerships, balanced context in experience, those multimodal learning strategies, how the child has agency, opportunities for extension, engagement, and enjoyment. We look at all of these in order to see what is happening and find gaps between our pedagogy, our practice, and the child's optimal experiences. We have to question ourselves in order to improve the experience and better the outcome. Moving on to the West Australian curriculum, pre-primary to Year 3. So I want us to consider using the Australian curriculum and the EYLF in conjunction with a play-based philosophy. We then have the West Australian curriculum content and achievement standards. So we're always going to look at it through that lens of a play-based philosophy. There are specific links between the learning content in both frameworks. So, for example, the EYLF outcome for children are engaged and confident learners closely relates to the Australian curriculum. We're looking at science, key component 2, children develop a range of skills and processes such as problem solving, inquiry, experimentation, hypothesizing, researching and investigating. The West Australian curriculum tells us the what to cover. The EYLF drives our pedagogy how. That's so important. The West Australian curriculum tells us what to cover. The EYLF drives how we cover that content. Teachers are encouraged to make professional judgments about how to deliver the curriculum in age-appropriate, contextualised and cross-disciplinary ways. So that's that integration. In terms of continuity of pedagogy, the West Australian curriculum recognises that early childhood approaches outlined and underpinned by the EYLF continue to be appropriate in the early years of schooling. So as programs transition from the EYLF to the West Australian curriculum, there should be an ongoing focus on the personal and social competence, literacy and numeracy, and critical and creative thinking. In other words, the domains transition into integrated learning areas. So these align with those general capabilities. Jenny Connor, the writer of the article Foundations for Learning, Relationship between the Early Years Learning Framework and the Australian Curriculum for Early Childhood Australia and Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, states that because of the complex and interrelated nature of the EYLF learning outcomes, it's potentially misleading to draw simplistic lines of connection between them and the West Australian curriculum's general capabilities. However, a careful analysis reveals significant points of contact, and these include outcomes 1, 2 and 3 of the EYLF. They provide essential foundations for personal and social competence. Outcome 2 underpins the capacity for ethical behaviour and intercultural understanding. Outcome 4 develops the dispositions for critical and creative thinking. Outcome 5 includes fundamental concepts and skills required for literacy, numeracy and ICT competence. Most importantly, while the formalisation of the early years has become a real threat to play, none of these key policies and documents state the need to reduce play. At no time they've stated the need to reduce play. Rather, we've been asked to provide evidence of the learning that happens based on the decisions that we make. In fact, they provide us with the knowledge and shared learning to defend play. In the early childhood setting, the EYLF defines curriculum as all the interactions, experiences, activities, routines, and events, planned and unplanned, that occur in an environment designed to foster children's learning and development. I just want to stop at this definition for a moment. Everything that happens throughout the day. So all our interactions, little routines that we do, experiences that occur in an environment designed to foster children's learning and development. All of these documents remind us that children learn in a variety of different ways. So multiple ways of knowing, different ways of acquiring information and demonstrating their knowledge. Therefore, it is essential that we provide a variety of experiences and resources, ensuring multiple approaches to content, what they learn, process, how they learn, and product, how they demonstrate it. Teachers have the flexibility to apply key principles and practices of early childhood teaching articulated in the EYLF, including learning through play. Play is not a break from the curriculum. Play is the best way to implement the curriculum. So it is your responsibility to be explicit about the links between specific play experiences and learning that will contribute to the children's success in formal schooling and show how the results will be evaluated. This helps to demonstrate the benefits of your early childhood program and show that you're accountable for your program. Our final thoughts. Early childhood educators must be able to articulate about the importance of play to be able to clearly justify and provide evidence for the benefits of play-based learning. So Lenny Barbatt said in 2010. So it really is that early childhood is a special branch of education that deals with children from birth to age 6, and therefore an early childhood curriculum has to be based on appropriate philosophy about early learning and child's development. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the tutorial.